true middle school story told by Mr. John McDonald. And he has a disclaimer here that he really does like seventh graders. So he says, I knew Houdini as a seventh grader. Not the real Houdini, of course. Not Harold Houdini. The boy I'm talking about was a seventh grader at the school where I was a principal. But Houdini was the nickname I gave him forever after that one fateful fall morning. Now, as principal, I didn't deal often with seventh graders. They amused me greatly, but they didn't get my jokes. So I mostly dealt with the eighth graders, who are less amusing, but who had a greater appreciation for my sense of humour. I think you already like this man, Whitey.
Yep.
So he left the seventh graders in the hands of one of his assistant principals. This one particular fall morning, however, he was standing, as he usually did at the start of the school, and he in the school lobby as students arrived and came in off the bus. It was one of his favourite times of the day, where he gets to speak to students as they come in, wish them a good day, and try to start the day off in the best way possible. On this particular day, though, as he was standing and greeting the arriving students, one of the seventh grade maths teachers came down the stairs and said, I'm going to leave these three with you, and I'm going back to supervise the rest of my homeroom. And when she was gone up the stairs, no further explanation or reason. As he turned to face the three she had left with him, he realised that he was about to have one of the best days as a principal. He says, now, ordinarily, I would have immediately turned the three over to the assistant principal, but I'd been doing this job for a while, and sometimes you just know that this will make a great story. Standing before me were three boys. One was in a pair of handcuffs, and the other two were either side of him. For now, we'll call them Larry, Curly, and Mo. Curly being the one in handcuffs. I didn't say anything immediately, and here's why. The looks on all three of their faces were nothing short of priceless, and he wanted to simply enjoy the moment as long as he could. Now, to understand this look, there's some things that you have to know about seventh grade boys. First, they're past the point of wanting to please adults. Don't I know it? They have thrown their sixth grade caution to the wind and are living simply in the moment. They think and plan ahead for as much as 10 to 15 seconds at a time, and they have not developed that eighth grade ability to realize that actions have consequences and that cause and effect is, in fact, a natural law of the universe and that one thing inevitably leads to another. At the same time, they've not yet developed the ability to reflect on the immediate past, to learn from their own mistakes, and in a sense, they're like a car meandering down the road of life, having the same or similar accidents over and over again as they go.
That's great imagery.
It really is, isn't it? So if you work with middle schoolers, you learn quickly what psychologists have known for years. Simply put, the human forebrain, where conscious decision-making occurs, is not fully developed in seventh graders. In fact, and I'm talking scientific fact, it won't be fully developed for several more years. Most experts agree that the forebrain will not be a finished working product until adulthood, a little sooner in females, late teens to early 20s, and a little later in males, he says, mid to late 50s.
But we get there in the end.
We do. It's spectacular. All right, so knowing this about the seventh grade mind makes the story easier to appreciate. If you have a seventh grader, know a seventh grader, or remember being a seventh grader, then you know what I mean. So anyway, these three boys are standing there, priceless looks on their face, and you can almost see the thoughts going through their minds. They don't have any idea how they got to this particular point in time, and they don't have any idea what to do or where they're going. They're lost on the sea of a seventh grade consciousness, which is not more than a few inches deep, by the way. They're casting virtual nets into the sea of consciousness, hoping to haul in a bountiful catch of wisdom, thought, or reason, something they can hold up as a valid explanation for what happened, something they can mount on the wall and say, let me tell you about this fish here. But unfortunately, all the fish in this shallow sea of consciousness are small minnows and guppies that swim right through the netting and vanish as fast as they appear. It's just a beautiful piece of writing.
That's quite a writer.
That is the seventh grade stream of consciousness. They had nothing. They were going to have nothing for at least another year, and yet little hamster wheels continued to turn in their heads. I stood there for what it probably seemed to them an eternity, and then I spoke. And as I did, you could see a spark of hope in their eyes. Finally, someone will explain what is happening here. I enjoyed that spark briefly before I doused it. I told them to go into the office and write statements about what had happened. The priceless look of confusion returned to their faces as they contemplated putting down into words those thoughts that they were incapable of wrapping their minds around in the first place. As a last-ditch effort to bring some meaning to the moment, Curly looked at me holding out his handcuffs and said, "But I have handcuffs on." I have wondered to this day whether he thought I didn't know he had handcuffs on, or whether I didn't know what handcuffs were, or how they worked, or whether those several moments of reflective and contemplative thought had simply yielded the only thing that he knew for sure. I have handcuffs on. So I smiled at him, more out of enjoyment than kindness, and restated my desire for them to go to the office and write their statements. After herding them into the office, the school resource officer came over to me and told me quietly, "I can unlock those handcuffs." I told him to come back in about half an hour. I wanted to enjoy the interrogation part first.
Absolutely.
I started with easy questions. Who bought the handcuffs? How did they get on Curly, etc.? It turns out Mo had bought them from home. They were his mother's. She worked at a jail. Larry, fascinated by the handcuffs and assuming they were a toy, put them on Curly, who willingly and gladly let Larry do so. Even Mo thought this was funny. They all thought this was great fun until they couldn't get them off, which eventually led them to be escorted to me. The interrogation moved to a scarier phase for the boys when I started asking harder questions like, "Why did you bring the handcuffs to school, Mo?" Mo quickly responded, "For show and tell." We all fell silent for a moment. Now, Mo, Larry, and Curly all knew that we didn't do show and tell in middle school. Hadn't really done show and tell since the second grade, some 5 years earlier. They knew this, but in their naive way, they hoped and prayed that perhaps I didn't know that. You could see the hope in their eyes as they pondered whether I would buy this truly brilliant explanation. It was a 1 in a million shot. But if you're a 7th grader, you'll take your chances with that any day. They all know they didn't know anything better. Now, I could have pushed Mo on this point and wiped out his alibi with the simplest of cross-examination, but I didn't. I knew it was the best he could do, and that was all he had. Besides, I was enjoying this. No, it was time for the knockout punch. "Did you bring a key?" I asked him after a moment or two of silence. The lost look returned to his face. It was a rhetorical question, of course, but he didn't know that. It was a yes or no question too, but that was of no benefit to him either. For 7th grade boys, the answer to a yes or no question can sometimes be quite elusive. I could see the wheels turning again, but they were just spinning. There was no traction, no forward movement, and the other two were standing behind him faithfully, the mud from that spinning tire splattering all over their perplexed little faces.
Oh, that's great.
It was time to stop. I knew I had been given a gift that day, but I also know that it couldn't go on forever. I had the school resource officer come and unlock the cuffs. I sent the boys back to class and called their parents. Mo's mother came to retrieve the handcuffs, and all she could do was shake her head. This was not Mo's first moment of genius. There had been many. But it was perhaps his most amusing. Larry went on to be Larry. What else can you say about Larry? But Curly became Houdini that day. And I know what you're thinking. Why nickname him Houdini when he couldn't get out of the cuffs? Houdini was an escape artist. He would have found a way to free himself from the cuffs, right? Mr. John MacDonald would argue to his death that Mr. Harold Houdini would not have been able to get out of those cuffs as a 7th grader because 7th graders just don't have the mental capacity to be able to do anything. Spectacular work.
That's great.
Mr. John
MacDonald. Let's top that.
Yeah.
Oh, it's incredible imagery there. Metaphor, brilliant. So well written.